Welcome everyone. We are going to get started here in just a couple minutes. It looks like people are pouring in, which is exciting. We'll just hang on here. If you want to fill your time productively and wanted to open another tab, you'll see at the bottom there we have the instructions to sign up for Hope College Connection if you haven't done that already. So if you want to take a moment to do that, that would be fantastic. Not required to participate in this webinar, but we would love to have you be able to be as connected as possible to other alum and to current students at Hope. So we'll get started. Hey everyone, I'm just going to give some folks one more minute to join in. If you'd like to, if you haven't heard this already, if you'd like to go to connection.hope.edu to sign up for the Hope College Connection, we would love that. It allows you to be connected to other alum and to current students to help mentor them or to connect to them for professional advice. So please feel free to do that a moment, and we will get started in just about a minute here. All right, we will get this party started. I'm Kate Ralston. Welcome everyone to our third Lunch and Learn webinar for Hope College alumni, and we're also excited to be welcoming students from the rising junior and senior class as well. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm Kate Ralston. I'm the Associate Director of Alumni and Family Engagement, and I am joined today by some fantastic colleagues. We have Megan Scheldt, and she's the program manager for the Boerigter Center for Calling and Career. I was teasing her before, I didn't know what to call her because it seems that she does everything and she does it all well. So we're excited to have her. She's going to be helping us with Q&A and some chat if you have any questions. We have Casey Pedro here, and I do have to put a little asterisk. She's going to be our interviewee today that we will be watching her be interviewed. And please keep in mind that there's some intentionality behind the pros and cons that we will be seeing today. So she is the employer relations liaison for the Boerigter Center. She's absolutely fantastic, and she has to be trying to have some cons in her interview today. And we also are joined by Matt Atkins. He's the external relations director for the Department of Business, and he will be the interviewer today. So he has lots of experience in lots of different fields, specifically in government in Washington, D.C. We're happy to have him here as well. And then, of course, the star of the show today, who many of you I'm sure know, we have Dale Austin. He is an associate dean in the Boerigter Center for Calling and Career. He was incredibly helpful to so many of us as we were going through Hope, and is helpful still, and he will be helping us with some commentary and interviewing and some tips as well. Just a couple little housekeeping things. You'll see a chat. I'm sure many of us have been using Zoom quite a bit in the past couple of months. Chat is where we will be doing questions. There's also a possibility for you to message us directly if you want to message the panelists directly if you have a question. Megan can handle that as well. So you can toggle down to just messaging the panelists. So if you have any questions, please use that chat. You can chat some questions throughout the process, but we are going to be answering the questions at the end of the program. So without further ado, I'm going to pass this on to Dale Austin and let him take it away with some tips about the interview.
Well, thank you very much, Kate. Thank you for the very nice introduction. As you go into your interviews, there are things you'll want to keep in mind. And I'm just going to briefly go over those before we get into the real interview, which is coming up, which we're all very excited about. First thing we want to really focus on is your general preparation steps. One of the things you want to do is research really well the role and the organization where you'll be doing the interviewing. This is critical because the questions that they will be asking in many instances are focused around your understanding of the role, how your background is related to preparing for that role, as well as your understanding of the organization. So you want to research the organization. What is their mission? What are their values? What are their products or services? You really want to know the organization well. And as I said, you want to know the role very well. Next, you really want to do a little bit of a self-assessment. What are your goals? What are your key experiences that are relevant to the role that you're pursuing? What are particular skill sets that you have? And you want to, of course, prepare for some common questions that you might get. Not only questions about strengths, weaknesses, but also more and more organizations over a number of years have been asking what are called behavioral questions or critical incident questions. These questions are really formulated with a focus on understanding the key expertise or skill areas needed to perform the role and asking you to give examples of those qualities. So for example, they might say to you, give me a time in the last year or two when you used good judgment to solve a problem. Here they're looking for your problem-solving abilities, which are core to many positions. To handle that question, you can think of what could be called the STAR, or what I prefer, the CAR method. STAR refers to what was the situation where you had to solve that problem, what was the task at hand, and then the action steps you took and the results. And the action steps, that's the core of the answer. You want at least 4 to 5 specific steps you took to address that challenge. The CAR method is context, challenge, and then action steps and results. But it's a good idea to research the role, see what qualities they're looking for, and then have at least 1, maybe 2 examples for each of those skills or qualities that they might ask for. It's much easier to be prepared in that way than to be asked a question that requires you to think specifically over the last few years of a very specific example, point in time, on the fly when you're already nervous. So it's good to prepare in that way. Additionally, you want to develop a really good set of questions. I've had more than one employer tell me they can assess as much by the quality of the questions that they're asked as the answers that are given to your interview questions. So asking really well thought out questions, not canned questions, questions that reveal that you know something about the role, the organization, etc. Very important. Have at least 6 to 8 questions, write them down. And when you go into that interview, not only do you have those in a Padfolio, but you can also have at least 2 to 3 copies of your resume or CV. Always bring that with you. Then what you also want to be prepared for is sometimes in interviews you can be asked what could be called Stumper Questions. These are questions that, as you can tell by the name, stump you. You have no idea what to say. And that can happen more often than one thinks. And it can be a source of some anxiety and nervousness. So how do we handle these types of questions? 3 points could be helpful. First, make sure you understand the question. Sometimes people think they understand the question and they go off in a different direction. So make sure you understand clearly the question. And if you don't, ask them to please rephrase it. Not ask them to repeat it, but rephrase it. Second, do a verbal stall? That's a really good question. Let me take a minute and think about that. And then third, have a visual picture in your brain, in your mind of your CV or resume. Scan down it, come up with an idea, and go with it. Your CV or resume should be your best quick summary of your background and experience. Another key part of getting ready for your interviews is practicing. Most of us, to be honest, are quite nervous going into interviews. We don't want to embarrass ourselves. We don't want to say the wrong thing. We don't want to, we want to make sure we're giving a good impression of our background and our skill set. And we don't know if the person with whom we're speaking is warm and affable, like most of the faculty at Hope College, as well as the staff, or if they're cool and aloof, like some people you know. So there's that factor also. In fact, I've coined a little term I call being in interview mode, where we're stiff, self-conscious, we speak in a monotone, we just are uncomfortable. And if any of you have competed in athletic events, you know that if you go into a competition stiff, the results typically aren't that good. What we want to try to do with really good preparation and a lot of good practice is move from interview mode to what could be called personality mode. You want your passion, your desire, your excitement and energy for this opportunity to come through very clearly. You want to simply be yourself. You want to recognize that you might be asked a question that throws you a little bit. You know now how to handle it. And then key also is practicing the interview process. Most of us have not developed the mental acuity, the mental sharpness. If someone just keeps asking us questions left and right, that we have all these great ideas. We need to practice. You could get a friend or a buddy in a safe environment, at least 6 feet away, and have them ask you questions. Or what you could do is we have really good software on the Boerigter website on our interview page called Interview Stream, where you can practice interviewing. But I would recommend practicing at least 2 or 3 times before you go into a real interview. Very important. You'll get some of the jitters out. You'll have more confidence. You'll be able to clearly communicate what you're bringing to that employer, the skill sets, the experiences, and what really is going to make you a good fit for that role and that organization. Also, what we want to do is more and more, especially in this COVID-19 setting, more and more interviews are taking place almost exclusively virtually. Now, many of us have had phone interviews, and on our Boerigter website, on the interview page, we have a list of 12 tips on handling phone interviews that I'd refer you to. But either with a phone or an online virtual interview, number one, again, you want to practice doing it. You don't want to go in cold. And second, you want to look at what the background is. You want to make sure that the background is relatively neutral when you're going into these interviews. And again, what you want to do is think of examples that you can bring into the conversation. Examples are key. Whenever I do interviewing, I typically listen for 3 to 5 points that you're trying to make in response to each interview question. I listen for good flow and engagement, but the most important thing are examples. It helps you document how you are prepared to do the work that you're interviewing for. I hope that these tips that we've been going over are helpful to you as you prepare for interviews. I think that this whole process is really important to prepare, to practice. It will give you more confidence going into your interviews, and the more confidence that you have, you're going to really do a better job. And the Boerigter staff is available to assist you with this process. So I'd like to pause now, and we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to turn things over to Matt, who's going to start a real interview. Matt.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Kate, for the intros as well. And thanks to every one of you for joining today. Hopefully you'll take away some valuable insights, whether you're doing an in-person interview next or a virtual interview. So just to give you a little bit of context, so I'll be playing the role of underwhelming and moderately intelligent interviewer, and then Casey has been cast as eminently qualified job candidate or job seeker. So I think you'll see that we were appropriately cast in each of those roles. And we'll be having a little bit of fun with a mock interview. I've got 5 or 6 questions that I have for Casey that we'll walk through. And just to give you an idea of the format, I'll ask the question, Casey will answer, and then Dale, who you just heard from, is going to chime in with some specific feedback after each answer. And specifically, he's going to be listening for both the content and the delivery. Are there positives that he can highlight? And then are there areas of improvement or suggestions that he might offer? So once Dale shared his feedback, I'll jump in and ask another question, and we'll just work through the interview in that format. And just to set the stage as well, so Casey's interview today, we're pretending it's a real position. The organization is called New City Kids. It's a nonprofit organization. Specifically, they do programming for low-income children with an emphasis on music and academics. And then specifically, this job is a national grants director position. So again, following Dale's advice, Casey would have researched that organization, that job specifically, and that's what we're going to interview for. So lastly, let's just assume that we've already gotten the awkward small talk phase that starts any interview out of the way. Casey and I have already talked about the weather, we've talked about sports or lack thereof, and now we're ready to jump right into it. So with that, let's jump in. So Casey, everyone's favorite first interview question, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, tell me about yourself. Sure. Well, I live in Holland, which is pretty close to your Grand Rapids location. In fact, my husband also works in GR, so maybe we could even commute together. Anyway, I grew up in Holland, but moved to Chicago after I finished undergrad. When I was in Chicago, I worked for a domestic violence shelter, one of the largest homeless shelters in Chicago, and I ended my time there at Northwestern University. In those positions, I really discovered how much I love working in the nonprofit sector. And after we got married and we moved back to Holland, I've been at Hope College ever since. I've absolutely loved my time at Hope, but I'm really excited for the opportunity to continue working with students and focus more on my writing for a position like this one.
So Casey, you've done a really good job to start things off. Thank you. I loved hearing what you had to say, especially at the end when you connected to what you were talking about to role. That's key when you're responding to a question like this. Many individuals really don't like this, candidates don't like this question because it is so open-ended. So nice job, really well done. I also liked how you emphasized key experiences in your background. Again, well done. I can't help but listening to a interview response and maybe think about ideas that could be helpful going forward for your future interviews. And one of the things that we really advise is to not bring in personal information, for example, about your marital status. I think you may have referred to your husband also working in Grand Rapids. And if you put that on the table, then it gives the employer opportunity to potentially talk about it. And we really want the focus to be on your skills and experiences and how it really prepared you well for this role. Also, it's pretty common in a conversation when someone asks us a question, we jump in with a response. The challenge in an interview is you have to think. But we're so used to engaging that sometimes in an interview, we're a little nervous. We might jump in with an or an okay or something else. Sometimes we even repeat the question. So what we want to do when we're answering a question in an interview is we can practice doing 3 little things. Once asked the question, the first thing we do is have a brief silent pause during which we mentally focus. What am I going to say? And then third, we deliver with only the content. So great start. Looking forward to the next questions.
So Casey, we've learned a little bit about you. What are 3 adjectives that you would use to describe yourself?
I would kind of describe myself as conscientious and persistent. However, my coworkers would kind of describe me as a perfectionist. This plays out when I'm working on team-oriented projects because I kind of tend to linger on the details. But with that, I'm very diligent and consistent in the work that I do to contribute to the overall success of the team.
Well, great job. You know, you're 2 for 2 here, doing really well in your answers. I really like the distinctive or unique characteristics or qualities you use to describe yourself. Really well done. I also liked how you were able to link your answers and connect them in such a clear and concise way. You just came across very smooth, very genuine also. Again, I can't help but offer some ideas. You know, one of the things that we may want to think about is when asked about your strengths or adjectives that describe you, give only positive qualities. Frankly, there'll be enough time for them to ask you about limitations or weaknesses. Trust me, they tend to do that. And so keep them all on a positive. Also, you probably didn't notice it. In fact, most of us don't notice it. But on a few occasions, you use the phrase kinda in your response. So let's say I ask you, Casey or Matt or Kate or Megan, do you want to have lunch today? Kinda. It sounds like you're not really sure when you really do want to. It just creeps into our vocabulary. So instead of the kinda, what we want to do is whatever you're going to say, you're behind 100%. It shows that sense of confidence. So well done. Great job. Looking forward to the next question.
So Casey, you've told us a lot about yourself. Why specifically are you interested in this position? Why apply for a national grant director role?
I have a passion for the nonprofit industry, supporting local communities, engaging with students from different backgrounds. And while at Hope, I've gotten to engage with a wide variety of employers and students. In fact, this year under my leadership, we had the second largest career fair Hope has ever seen. We also are working on exciting new programming for the fall. So I would be up for the challenge that this position requires.
Well, I hate to say it, but you are 3 for 3. You're doing a great job and really appreciated your focus on your leadership qualities. As a director in this nonprofit, leadership is a key quality that they would be looking for. So great job. Also, you're a quick study. You didn't have a single kinda in your answers. You had that sense of confidence, which is great. A couple of just minor tweaks that you may want to consider. Maybe share only examples that are relevant. So any examples that aren't necessarily relevant to the role, don't worry about bringing those in. And then, especially in a virtual environment, what we want to try to do is keep our eyes on the eye of the camera. Because if you look down on the screen or up or around, it may convey you don't have good eye contact. Now, Casey, I know you have great eye contact. This is just a mock session. But when you're doing virtual or in person, eye contact is important. Virtual, keep your eye on the camera. Don't look down at the screen because it'll look like you're looking down. But overall, great job. Looking forward to the next one.
So thank you, Casey. I know why you're interested in a grant director position, but why specifically New City Kids? Why are you interested in this organization?
I read on your website that New City Kids is about loving kids for change to create a community of academic leadership, musical and spiritual development. And that's something that really fires me up. And I would love to be part of a team that embodies those values.
Well, boy, another great response. Really liked what you had to say. Thank you, Casey. What struck me is that you articulated nicely New City Kids' mission in a concise, really clear way. It shows you've done research on the organization. Just a key thing that we want to be doing before we go into any interview. I also see that natural energy, that excitement that you have. And for all of us, it's going to be a little different. Some of us that are more extroverted, it's going to be maybe a little clearer. For some of us that are more introverted or quieter, it may be conveyed in a different way. But being able to convey that interest, that energy in the role, that's huge. What I would recommend going forward for your future interviews is tell me more about New City Kids. Tell me more about who they serve in the New Jersey area. Tell me more about challenges that they face that you as the new director are going to help them address. So I would have maybe 4 to 5 meaty points about New City Kids. It'll really show that extensive research that you've done. And I don't know if others may have noticed it, but maybe there was just a little fidgeting, not a lot, so good, but there was some fidgeting, and we tend to fidget when we're nervous. And even a more common fidget, if you will, a way to fidget is when we're in person or even virtually. If we have a chair that moves, we might rock back and forth. In fact, I hate to call athletes out, but in my experience, athletes and other individuals, but especially athletes, they've got all that energy and they tend to do a lot of moving. And so we just want to be aware of that. And if your chair moves, just be aware of staying calm, focus that energy on the content and effective delivery through the interview process. But good job.
So Casey, switching gears a little bit, let's move to your future. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
That's a great question. Well, I probably would love to be in a position where I can begin my own nonprofit. Specifically, I always want to be in a role where I'm challenged, continually learning, and constantly growing. I think that I would probably be personally impacted by this role. When I worked at the homeless shelter in Chicago, I found I was being challenged by working with people who had different leadership styles than I did. That was a great opportunity for me to learn more about how I like to be managed and how others like to be managed. This growth opportunity is probably something I'd hope to continue to focus on in the next 5 years as well.
Boy, really nice full answer that reveals your good self-knowledge. Casey knows herself. You're comfortable with yourself. You came across very genuinely, very authentic. You really displayed a term some are using in certain circles called emotional intelligence. So well done. And what I also liked, sometimes we're going to be faced with some more challenging questions. And you bought time at the beginning with some silence. And silence is much better than an repeating the question. Not only at the beginning, having that brief silence to focus, but also as you're going point to point in an answer. Instead of the ums and the ahs, just little silence shows your poise and composure. So really well done. But I also have to offer just a few easy ideas, quick ideas that are easy to change. And that would be, I would not really bring up that you're thinking about starting your own nonprofit in 3 years. Most organizations tend to hire for the longer term. And if they're thinking that you're going to be leaving in a few years, well, it poses a red flag, or at least a yellow flag. And so they tend to invest in their employees. And so I would avoid saying that. And you may not have noticed it, but a few times you use the word probably. And that's a little bit like our other word that you used earlier called kinda. So instead of the probably something, you just want to say what you think it will be. And so the word probably, again, is that tentative language that we can want to avoid if possible. So good job.
Casey, can you think of any specific examples of where a weakness that you have might prevent you from being as effective as possible in this particular role?
Okay, biggest weakness. Okay, one of the biggest weaknesses I have is being a perfectionist. It would impact my ability in this role because sometimes it takes too long for me to develop content. One example I can think of would be when I redesigned the website for the homeless shelter I worked for in Chicago. And I really found myself kind of too far into the weeds and too focused on some of those details.
Well, thank you, Casey, for being so genuine and transparent with us on an area that you can improve in. Let's talk about that just briefly. What I really liked is the clarity and conciseness with your specific example. So it painted a brief but clear picture. Second, one of the things that I really noticed about you through this whole interview that I want to mention is what I call your likability factor. You're just someone that people are going to want to work with. You have this exuding positive demeanor and tone. And the likability factor is huge. Many companies, when they have candidates in for interviews, and the interview goes through a series of interviews with all kinds of individuals, one of the debriefing questions they commonly ask everyone is, could you see working with this person for 8 hours on an 8-hour project or 10 hours? And so you have really that likability factor. And I share with many students that mock interviews at Hope that many students at Hope have this positive likability factor, which is tremendous. Now for just a couple of tweaks, a couple of suggestions. One would be that I talked earlier about, and it's hard to really shift gears and master this in just a few minutes, when asked behavioral questions, when asked, for example, a specific example that would impact your ability to be effective in the role. When we're giving a specific example, we want to describe the situation which you did, but I would put much more focus on the action steps. What did you do to address the situation and the positive results? Always talk about the results and the positive results. Also, another little tweak, I would really avoid using the word perfectionist. It tends to be relatively cliche. A lot of people use it, and it may not carry the weight that you really want to use. And so that would be something. Also, when you're giving the weakness, I would talk about what you're doing to improve. So talk about what you've learned through that, what the benefit is to that organization. And so cast it in terms of what you learned and where you grew. And then finally, what you want to do is recognize, and you didn't do this, but I find this in interviewing, when people are asked about a weakness, they'll really try to dress up one of their strengths as a weakness. Oh, I work too hard, or I'm not as an effective delegator as I could be, or I'm too passionate about my work. You really don't want to do that. You want to give a legitimate area that you can improve in, because we certainly all have areas that we can improve in. You just don't want to give something that will be problematic. I don't have a list of handy dandy weaknesses, but do a practice interview. It's a great way to learn through that process. And one other tweak, at the beginning, you tended to repeat the question and then said, So again, as we said before, just have a brief pause, mentally focus, and then deliver. But all in all, well done. And I think you'll be prepared for your future interviews. Good job.
That was the last interview question, so I can conclude that she's been hired. No, I'm just kidding.
All right, so now would be a great time if you have additional questions to type them into the chat, but we actually have a couple of questions that have come in. So we're just gonna start with the first one that came in. So Dale, we talked a lot about tentative language, those filler words like, they naturally come out when we're nervous. So can you speak into ways you can practice eliminating those words to improve that through your practice?
Sure, that's a great question. I think one of the things you want to do is feel comfortable with brief silence. Brief silence is your friend. not your enemy. And it shows poise and composure. Second way is if you're finding you're using a lot of ums or likes, and we tend to do that. We don't have a camcorder following us around where we then showing us how much we're saying it. What I recommend is what I call the 20-minute daily practice. For 20 minutes every day, just be aware of the or the like. Unless your family or friends, probably in this point, your family, not your friends, because they're not around you. And have them say, oh, you just used or you just used like. And just be aware of it for that 20 minutes. After a week, you're going to begin to say or like less. And according to behavioral psychologists, if you do that 3 to 4 weeks, 20 minutes a day, make it fun. This is not serious, make it fun. Over that 3 to 4 weeks, you will change that habit or behavior, and then the ums or the likes will disappear, or at least they'll dramatically decrease. So great question.
Great. So our next question is around where do you see yourself in 5 years? How do you balance honesty and give a realistic answer? So this person, they put the question and was alluding to, I don't expect a student to know they want to make partner in 20 years, but I also want them to be honest that they're not just going to leave once they get a little bit of experience. So how do you have some happy balance with what you believe is realistic when delivering that response?
Sure. Yeah, I think that that is a challenging dynamic, especially if you know you're thinking about going on to med school in 2 years or 3 years or whatever time frame, or at least you hope to. And the hope to is the key variable in the sense that you might want to go to med school. I've known some, of course, non-hope grads that ended up not getting into med school. They thought they would be. So you're really not going to know if you're going to go to med school until you're accepted. And so I think you want to be genuine. You do not ever want to misrepresent. So if you know that you're going to be gone in a year for whatever reason, then you need to look at work that is more appropriate for short-term work. And there are opportunities like that out there. If, on the other hand, you are interested in working for 3 to 5 years and you don't know. I mean, I asked a candidate 6 years ago this question, and they said they would commit to 4 years. After a year, they got engaged and left. They didn't know they were going to be engaged. They were genuine. They felt badly about it, but it happens. So I think you want to be genuine, authentic. You do not want to misrepresent in any way. And you also know what your options are and what the likelihood is that you're going to be going off to either med school, because you don't have control over whether or not you're going to be accepted in any particular programs. And I think another response could be, if an employer asks this question, a candidate could say, what type of commitment are you looking for, or what's going to be important to you as you invest in me as I get back to this organization?
Can I weigh in there too, just briefly, Megan?
Absolutely, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's important to keep in mind to just step back even before you go into the interview and anticipate questions like that. But what are they really trying to get at there? And what do you owe them in an answer like that? So sometimes we tend to approach it, and I think this might even be a generational thing too. My dad will constantly talk about, he uses a marriage analogy when he talks about his employer and his commitment to his employer. And frankly, that's just not the way the employer views it anymore, even if they ever used to. And so what I'm saying is, I think we sometimes put too much weight in that question, like, oh gosh, I have to show them that I have a lifelong commitment to this company. And the fact of the matter is, you don't have to demonstrate a lifelong commitment to the company, but you have to demonstrate that you're not using them either. So if your answer is, I'm interested in public accounting, I only want to work at Deloitte for 2 years, that's the maximum I'll do. I can't wait to hightail it out of public accounting and then go private. If that's the sense the employer gets, they are going to be turned off by that. But I think you can say, you know, I'm trying to figure out if public accounting is for me or not. I definitely want to get at least a few years under my belt in this. I'm planning to be in Chicago for mid to long term. This is the top firm that I'd like to be at, and just see where the answer goes. And you don't have to tell them, yes, making a 10-year commitment to Deloitte, but you also don't have to tell them, I want to get in and out as fast as I possibly can. So it is a balance. I like how you use the word balance in your question. That's the important part to strike.
And I would probably add as well, have you shown them some other attributes to that answer? Are you coachable? Are you likable? These people have to work with you. So they want to make sure that you're going to be a good fit culturally for their organization and their team to be successful as well. So the next question's around the weakness question. This is one we probably get a lot here in Boerigter. So two-part question for you, Dale. One, how do you determine your weakness? We'll start there. How do you pick out what's your biggest weakness as you're kind of evaluating your answers? So that's going to be part one of that question.
Sure. Well, I think one of the things you want to do is look at the position description. And if they're interviewing you and you don't have a particular background, maybe you're not able to do macros in Excel or do something that is trainable, that's learnable, that's a pretty safe limitation to bring in. So I think if you can bring up something that they might already know about you because they have candidate information about you, that's pretty safe. And then it also gives you a chance to address it. It's on the table. You can talk about how you would address that in the role or even before starting. So I think that's the easiest way. I think also you don't want to give them something that will really reveal a major flaw that you have. It's natural for most of us to procrastinate. It's human nature. But if you say it in an interview, it becomes huge. And so it's really problematic. And so choosing a legitimate area that you can improve in that does not sound cliche. And then once you've given the limitation, then move to a specific example illustrating how you've addressed it. You don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the weakness. In fact, only describe it in a sentence or two. Move to an example showing improvement so that you're ending it on an answer. And then also, I think others may chime in on this. Matt's insights are great. Casey's are also. And Megan, thank you for yours. But I think more and more employers are asking for more than one weakness because many candidates come to their interview with one weakness in their back pocket. And then they're asked for two and they have to scramble, and there's a good likelihood that second one, if they're scrambling, isn't going to be something that they're going to want to say. And so as a follow-up to this, I would just recommend a practice interview. Let's have one of our Boerigter team do a practice interview with you. We'll ask you the question. We'll debrief on your weakness or limitation, and you'll be in great shape.
I think just self-awareness too. Just ask others. Like, if you have a supervisor or colleague that you really trust to give you honest feedback, ask them, where could I improve? And start crafting that into your weakness answer. Go ahead, Matt. I'm sorry for cutting you off.
No. Only other thing I was going to add is sometimes we tend to think of weaknesses as personal development things like time management, procrastination, perfectionism, and those are some examples of weaknesses. But you can also think about where you as a candidate in particular fall short to that particular job. Maybe it's an experience area. So for instance, like when I applied to Hope College for the job I have now, one of the bullet points in the job description called for experience in higher education preferred, I think it said, or something like that. I have never worked in higher ed. So this question did come up in my interview, and I said, I'll put that on the table. I've never worked in a higher ed environment. Here's some environments that I have worked in. Here's how I think I can adapt, but that is a weakness comparing me to other candidates that are probably applying for the job. So it can be an area of experience that you lack, as well as either a personal quality or even a specific example of where something went wrong, a program that you were leading didn't go as planned.
So part two of this question, Kate, Casey, Matt, Dale, feel free to all chime in here. Can we just provide maybe a handful of other examples of weaknesses that maybe you've heard in an interview or you've given yourself in an interview?
Well, I'll do it at the risk of also saying, please don't use this, because the danger of giving examples is people will say, oh, good, I now have an example I can use, and I don't have to do the hard work that Matt and that each of us are talking about that I think is important. Because, one of the things we talked about with Casey's really good interview with Matt's questions is authenticity. And that was reflected in one of the questions on the 5-year goal. The employer wants the candidate to be authentic. So I think that I'll give one, but you can't use it. But it serves as an illustration. And that would be one that occasionally hear from seniors. And it's true because we've got seniors that are really busy, is sometimes they're not an effective delegator. And so then they'll segue to an example where they did delegate effectively and it's benefit to their student organization. And I'm sure we've got great panelists here. I'm sure others have other good thoughts too.
Yeah, I think some are, well, let me step back. What Dale said is absolutely true. It needs to be the best weaknesses, it sounds weird to say, but the best weaknesses that people give are when people have done a lot of self-reflection, they know who they are, you're being very genuine, and it's an answer that is very Casey specific, not an answer that came off Indeed.com, best weaknesses for an interview. But some examples might be like maybe it's, this setting makes me very uncomfortable. I'm very uncomfortable in public speaking situations. So I think there probably is an element of this job where I am going to have to do a lot of public speaking. It's something I've worked on. I took Professor Pocock's public presentations class. I've joined my local Toastmasters organization, but candidly, as an introvert, jumping up in front of people is, so I mean, that's one way you could take it. But again, it needs to come back to knowing yourself, being comfortable in who you are, sharing something that maybe makes you a little bit vulnerable, or is just an area that you just don't have enough experience in yet. The job description says 3 to 5 years of experience, and you're 1 year out of hope. You don't have 3 to 5 years of experience. That's an easy weakness. You lack the experience that some of your peers for that position would have.
And to piggyback off of what Megan was saying too, I think it's really important to show that you've done some self-reflection, and you can even say, well, you know what, I've actually talked to my current supervisor, my current colleagues about this, and we talked about this specific thing that I'm trying to work on. Or even if you fall back on different like Strengths Quest, those sort of things that you know about yourself, these personality or professional kind of panels that you've taken to try to determine different things about yourself, and using that information to show that I've looked into myself, I'm working on this in my professional development. This is something that I've paid attention to, just showing that you've done the work and done the research. That can be helpful too.
And I would finally add to that, never call it a weakness. I always say, I'm trying to improve this area, or one thing I've been really working on in the past year in my role has been blank. When Casey answered her question, she said, my biggest weakness is, don't draw attention to that. Say, I'm really trying to work on, or that's a great question. Let me tell you how I've been working on being a better delegator this past year. You're already saying this is a challenge that I am overcoming versus acknowledging that it's a weakness itself.
I'd like to piggyback off Kate really quick. If you are familiar with strengths, a good document to look up is the basement and the balcony document. It talks about when you're living your best self out of that strength and when you're not living your best self out of the strength. And it can be a good place to start and give you language to start that self-reflection process. And that's a simple Google search. If you look Strengths Quest, basement and balcony.
Can I piggyback on that too? So great work, Casey, on that. And Kate, thanks for bringing up the strengths topic. If you're going to talk about strengths, your own strengths, you might have strength from the Strengths Quest Gallup tool that aligns well with the position. It's critical that if you're going to bring in one of your Strengths Quest qualities, that it really aligns well. And don't use strengths language, in my recommendation. If you're a woo, if you say woo in an interview, they're going to think, whoa. So you want to instead really put it in lay language that everyone on the street's going to understand, and describe it, give an example if you can. But Kate, thanks for bringing up the strengths topic. And Casey, it's great to reference how you can learn more. But use strengths, but use it wisely.
Great. So again, we have about 10 minutes left, and there's a few more questions here to answer. So Justin Lubbers submitted a question, and he asked, should Casey be more specific and go into more details in her examples and how it relates to the job specifics?
I have thoughts on that, but I want to make sure my colleagues on the panel have a chance to talk. So what are other thoughts? And I'll pitch in at the end.
I was going to say, Casey, if you want to take it, I've done too much talking. It's all you.
I would say yes. I would definitely provide more specifics in my examples if I were to be doing a real job interview. So something I like to do is I like to write out my answers in advance and read them through, or have somebody else read them through, just to poke holes in it and see where I might be missing information.
I think, to piggyback off Casey, the key thing to do when you're preparing your answers is make sure that you're not coming off scripted. Mm-hmm. Writing down your answers, writing down CAR or STAR, and making sure that you have academic, personal, and business related examples, diversifying your answers is really helpful. But some of us, like when we have a photographic memory, we're reminding ourselves of those words and we can come off inauthentic. So it's really important to practice saying those out loud. Watch yourself in the mirror, practice that muscle memory so it feels more natural when you go into the real interview. One thing I see a lot with our students at Hope, specifically and in young professionals, is they tend to use the same example over multiple questions. Now, sometimes you have an awesome example and you're speaking about it very dynamically, but it's really important to diversify your answers so you come with a more holistic approach to your interview and they can learn more about you and your experience than just one specific situation.
No, these are all great tips and suggestions. And I think that I referenced before when talking about behavioral questions is think about these and have them in mind before. That is critical, because if you're in an interview and you haven't thought about a very specific example, it's going to be especially hard to give the action steps for 3 to 5 very specific instances where you demonstrated problem solving in a specific example. And feedback we've gotten from major employers is our students have that really good likability factor. They engage well, they're personable, they're approachable. One of the areas that students at Hope, and I think in general students can work on, is really preparing for these behavioral questions. And it gets it right at the question about more detail with examples.
Great. So this last question that we have in here is kind of around the Stumper question. So first part of this question, what are examples of Stumper questions that maybe have been asked in an interview, or a question that surprised you, caught you off guard? And then are there any tips for showing confidence when you get that Stumper question? And then third part, what is new questions, new themes that we're kind of hearing in interviews today?
Man, I love Stumper questions. Dale, you go ahead.
No, I've got one in mind. So take this first part, and I'm sure panelists will have others, and I'll throw one in too. So jump on it, Matt.
Well, a couple examples. So one I would say is some companies and in some industries, Stumper questions, really silly ones actually, it was all the rage for probably a decade or so. And I think companies are moving away from it a little bit, but companies like Yahoo and Google really piloted trying to demonstrate how you think on your feet with just a crazy question. And some of the examples would be like, how many golf balls does it take to fill the fuselage of a Boeing 747? Or how many gallons of ice are in an NHL ice rink? Or sorry, how many gallons of water make up an ice rink? And it's stuff that nobody in their right mind would know or even know how to figure out the answer. But what they're trying to do with some of those questions is just gauge what your thought process will be in a work setting when you're faced with a seemingly impossible task too. So if your response is preposterous, nobody could know the answer to that, it might demonstrate something about your personality and when you hit an obstacle, how easily will you give up? Or if you sit there and play along with it and have some fun and say, okay, well, I mean, if I'm sitting in a seat, let's say the Boeing 747 has 250 seats and I can hold I feel like I could hold 280 golf balls, and let's do 250 times 300 is, I'm just going to guess, let's say 150,000 golf balls. Then at least they're seeing, okay, here's how their thought process works. They don't care if you get the right answer on golf balls or not. So just know that sometimes a stumper question, there's not a perfectly right answer to it. They want to know, I want to know, and I will say I spent 5 years as an executive recruiter, and we would very intentionally ask questions to try to knock you off your feet. It sounds mean, but try to knock you off your feet and rattle you a little bit, just to see how do you respond when you're rattled. And that's all we care about, is just your response to being rattled, not the actual answer. So just keep that in mind. If you have something that's a stumper question, be calm, buy time like Casey did and Dale talked about, being comfortable with silence. It's okay to think it through and then give an answer that reveals who you are and how you think about things.
Megan, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think knowing in advance that a stumper question may be coming and it's going to produce tentative language, the ums, the likes, the nervousness, and just taking a deep breath. It feels so awkward to have that silence, because when you ask somebody, you see them across campus, you're like, hey, Megan, I'm automatically going to respond. That's my natural inclination. But know that just like pausing, slowing down your speech, speaking slower than you think you need to, will really help your brain catch up to what you need to say.
To the first question of that 3-part question, Microsoft used to ask 4 questions. So I'm dating myself a little bit. Matt's just a few years younger than I am with Google examples. But one of the questions was, why are manhole covers round? And everything Matt said in terms of their purpose is spot on. I mean, that's why. And a question I asked a number of years ago in a panel interview of a candidate interviewing at Hope College was, tell me about a specific instance in the last year when you failed. We don't think about our experiences in terms of failure. And the person followed the stumper sequence that I mentioned, but at the end didn't have an answer. And as someone interviewing, it was okay. I mean, she had so many other strong answers that it did not affect my recommendation about recommending her for the role. So I think what the panelists have been saying is great. And I think just staying calm, logically thinking through it. They might say, if you were to be an animal, what type of animal would you be? Or if you were a can of Campbell's soup, which soup would it be? They're interesting.
Okay, we're going to ask one last question. This one that came in is fairly unique to our current situation with COVID-19. So it says, what are the panelists' thoughts for us interviewee asking the question, what was your organization's response to the COVID-19 environment in terms of employee safety? This person's heard this question floated around as a good feeler question for how the organization cares about the workforce and their employees, but maybe will become more of a canned question given how long this pandemic's been going on. So curious on everyone's thoughts there, and then we'll go ahead and wrap it up after that.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. My only advice would be to not have it be the first question. You're going to have 6 to 8 questions. You're going to be asking questions about the role, the challenges in the role, key priorities the first 3 or 6 months, questions about the work culture. And then after you've had a few questions about the organization and work culture department, then I would ask about something that may or may not be a little more delicate. I mean, if they're taking really good measures, then that's great. But if they're not, it's going to be a little more awkward for them to answer, and you want to have established a good sense of rapport.
And one quick thing I'd add to that is also just always try to think about, what am I actually trying to get at with this question? So I think Dale took it the way that I would too, that you're trying to get at organizational culture and what the workplace is for you. But let's say you ask that to a place like Steelcase, for example, they might take that and say, I mean, couldn't you have Googled that before you came in? Like, obviously, and maybe they're taking the question as a manufacturing response. So we limited our manufacturing and furniture, but we shifted gears and we started making PPE and doing all these other things, shifting company operations. So just make sure you know what you want out of that question and that it doesn't come across as ignorant. Because if they hear the question as, what did your company do in response to COVID-19, they could at least think, why didn't he or she Google that before they came in? And then you'd want to ask a more thorough, thoughtful question than just something you could have figured out in a few minutes of public research.
And it brings up another great point that Matt touched on and addressed really nicely. And that is that you can ask almost any question. It tends to not be what the topic is, but it's how you're framing it. And if you're interviewing for a position that you know requires some travel and you're not really excited about a lot of travel, if you say in one of your questions, am I going to have to travel in this position? Versus saying, will I have an opportunity, or will a person in this role have the opportunity to travel? When really you're thinking you're not really excited about traveling, you don't want to tip your hand in the question. You want it to be neutral or positive. You want to engage.
All right, well, that is about as much as we have time for. We are just coming up on 12:30. So thank you so much for those of you who joined us. Thank you for connecting with you and answering your questions throughout the chat. We've got to most of them. But also, if you have more questions for us, you can always contact us, any of us, as well, through email or calling. A main email line is alumni@hope.edu. We can delegate that to Boerigter Center or to the Alumni Engagement Office, so feel free to contact us through there. If you are loving what you're seeing and want to join us again in July, on July 13, we have another webinar coming up with Megan, telling us about how we can be connected to current students and do some mentorship through the Discover Work program. So we would love to see you there. You can keep your eyes peeled for more information and registration for that. We will also be following up with you from this webinar. Keep your eyes peeled for an email with resources and things that we've mentioned, as well as a recording. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we will hopefully be in contact soon.